Well, we finally reached a point in this podcast that I have been, shall we say, avoiding for the past 10 years, longer than that, actually. But as far as this podcast goes, for 10 years. And you've heard me say numerous times that I do not like how UFOs or UAPs get included in the idea of conspiracy theory because there's a clear mark of delineation between the two. Conspiracy is something that doesn't have any verifiable, any absolute concrete proof, whereas UAPs does have some verifiable testimony and evidence behind it. Whether they end up being alien spacecraft or interdimensional spacecraft or just secret military objects, we don't know that yet. But as far as empirically proving that they're real, they are real. We all know that. And no other proof needs to be shown or said other than to point out the now famous leaked videos from 10 years ago from the Navy, the Nimitz and the Tic Tac and those videos. So they are real. And there's plenty of, as skeptics like to call for, qualified observers given testimony about it. So they're not a conspiracy, they are real. But over the past few years, and it's really exploding now, it's the conspiracy angle is starting to creep into ufology. And maybe there is some kind of conspiracy growing around it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about people in that field coming up missing or disappearing or flat out passing away by odd or strange manners. And it's just not one or two, it's a whole host of people that have come up missing that aren't necessarily within or only within the ufology field, but they're within a field that maybe could be working on ufology. Or, for example, if there were crashed or retrieved UAPs. Well, let me put it this way. Let me show you a video to catch you up to speed.
8 scientists, all missing or dead, and the government still has no answers. The people who know the most classified secrets in America are disappearing. First, a materials scientist with NASA ties. She went for a hike in California in 2024 and never came back. No body, no evidence, and no leads. Search and rescue found nothing. She's still listed as missing. Then there's the retired Air Force general, decades in advanced research programs. One day in 2025, he vanished from his own home. No signs of a struggle, no note, no sightings since. And these cases keep coming. An astrophysicist, respected, published, connected to cutting-edge research, was shot and killed on his own front porch. What makes the story so compelling is the overlap. Several of these individuals had professional connections or worked on classified or cutting-edge projects, which fueled speculation about whether there could be a larger pattern or even a coordinated threat. Now authorities are focused on why. 8 people in different states and different fields, but they all had one thing in common: access to information most people will never see. For now, what looks like a chilling pattern may actually be a series of unrelated tragedies. But until more answers emerge, the mystery of these scientists continues to spark concern and debate.
Oh, it's more than 8, and we're going to get to that here in just a minute. But it is kind of concerning, and I realize people watching this that are absolutely anti UAP or anti-conspiracy theory point out that people go missing and die of mysterious circumstances every single day. That is, in and of itself, 100% true. But is this a case of our modern short form video society where we're hearing about all this stuff and putting the strings together? Or is it something else? It's mysterious. And well, I'll save the next part for let's learn a little bit more about these recent disappearances and deaths, and then we'll take the historical aspect from there.
Okay, now there are even more people being added to the list of scientists, officials, and people who went missing or passed away under mysterious circumstances connected to things like aerospace. First, let's talk about Amy Eskridge. She was a Huntsville, Alabama-based researcher who founded the Institute for Exotic Sciences in Holocron LLC, where she claimed to be developing advanced propulsion technologies like anti-gravity. And if you didn't know, Huntsville is also called Rocket City. It's home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. And
Okay, keep that in mind because Alabama is central to a lot of things within aerospace and NASA and all of that. And why is that? It's because way back in World War II, after the Germans and the Nazis started to fall, the scientists and the smart folks of the Nazi party were kind of split up between the Soviet Union and the Americans for the most part, the United States. Some of them were taken by the Russians, some were taken by the Allies, the United States, and some of them came over here and worked for the United States government. And their base was predominantly in New Mexico and in Alabama. So that's still where a lot of this research takes place, is in Alabama and out west.
the Redstone Arsenal. Hey, wasn't that a guy who tried breaking into Area 51 recently? Didn't he claim to be a scientist from Redstone Arsenal? Huh. Anyway, in June 2022, Amy was found unalived. Officially, it was ruled as self-inflicted, and even her father came out recently because everyone's talking about this, and he was saying that there was nothing suspicious about what happened to her. But people have been asking questions because of all of these other researchers, scientists, and officials that this kind of thing has been happening to. And you have to wonder, is there a connection here? In a resurfaced interview from 2020, Amy suggested that her work could have major implications for future propulsion systems and might even explain how UFOs operate. She also talked about disclosure and mentioned that what we think of as aliens are actually us from the far future.
Now, we're going to come back to disclosure right after this video because that's sort of central to what this whole thing is about, at least in my opinion.
Coming back in time after some calamity, and that if disclosure was ever to come from anywhere, it would come out of Huntsville, Alabama. Now, before her death, Amy was also publicly talking about how everything turned upside down in her life after she claimed to have cracked anti-gravity and was planning on releasing foundational research after getting approval from NASA. She believes she was being targeted and even had an instance where her hands seemed to have gotten burned, which she claimed was through someone beaming a device through her office window. Something.
Now, that part is unsubstantiated, so the whole idea of her having just her hands burned from a beam going through her office window, that is within this story an unsubstantiated conspiracy
That also affected the glass in that window. And one of the most bizarre things I've come across with looking into this case is this leaked collection of unsettling text messages between her and a coworker. Check some of these out and pause to read. Now, I'm not quite sure what to make of all of this. It's possible that this was a real struggle with mental health issues, as the official story says, or maybe there really was some kind of foul play involved. Either way, the whole case is bizarre, but let me know what you think in the comments, and if you think there is a connection to everything else that's going on here.
Now, he centered on her story, but the story gets a lot bigger because, as they stated at the beginning, there is now 12 scientists and officials involved in secret governmental research that have mysteriously come up missing and or been found unalived, to use the modern phrase. I know if you use killed or dead, then your videos get flagged. So I'll try to remember to say unalived, but there has been a strange number of those folks that have come up missing and or been found. And it's weird because they're all working within the same general industry. And in this age where disclosure gets talked about a lot, and there's been a lot of testimony in front of Congress, and we'll talk about the most specific one here in just a minute, that there's a lot of pushback from folks to keep this information that they're offering up to make public. There's a lot of pushback from officials that want to keep it secret. So people that are starting to speak out are kind of coming up unalived and or just plain vanishing. And high profile ones can sort of, I don't want to say escape the dangers of it, but they don't get unalived. The high profile ones, for example, David Grouch, who testified at the House subcommittee meeting on disclosure a couple of years ago, he pretty much had his life dragged through the coals with a lot of strange assertions of alcoholism and mental health issues and whatnot. And they basically buried him in the press to where they were trying to discredit everything that he claimed that he testified in front of the House. So he's too out there to sort of disappear, too much of a big name. So he didn't mysteriously disappear or turn up dead. But on the other side of that, they really made all of these claims that pretty much ruined his entire name. But oddly enough, if all that stuff was true that they said about David Grouch, they didn't take away his pension or anything. He's still getting that from being retired. But you would think if he broke all of these rules and was such a threat that they would be able to pull his pension too, but they never did. That's kind of suspicious. But something is going on that all these people coming out to talk are now either having their names sullied like David Grouch, or they're coming up missing like the general that we just learned about recently that was just out for a hike that he had taken hundreds of times before, and he's just plain disappeared. Nobody knows where he went. And during the search, they can't find any signs of a body or anything. He's just disappeared off the face of the earth, nowhere to be found. Now, I know a skeptic will say, well, maybe he just wanted to walk away from life, because that happens a lot with folks. And that very well could be true. But he's just I think, the 12th member of this little community that's starting to talk about things that maybe shouldn't get talked about, that just seems to have vanished or has been unalived. And that is a little curious. The idea of a government or the military hushing people isn't anything new. I know folks in today's day and age in 2026 like to bring everything into a modern vernacular, but this specifically within ufology has been happening almost since the beginning. Matter of fact, it has been happening since the beginning. You can go as far back to the beginning of Roswell, when Mac Brazel, the rancher who first allegedly took the debris into the Roswell police station, and it was turned over to the Air Force in Roswell. He was held by the military for 3 days. And when he was finally released after 3 days, gave a press conference where you could tell that he was, well, let's just say he wasn't speaking very convincingly. All he would agree to say, according to testimony, was that he wishes he would have never taken that stuff in and made it public. So, was he pressured to change his story? Yeah, he probably was, but I guess we'll never know. But this odd circumstances of people passing away or people disappearing, this isn't a new modern thing. Like I said, this happened as far back as the beginning, because if you believe the whole Majestic 12 group thing, then it started there. Because after Roswell, the government and the military really wanted to control this information, if it is in fact all true, and it certainly looks like it is, because there's a lot of verifiable proof. Because as the story goes, when Truman formed Majestic 12, the panel of 12 people to oversee all of this information about flying discs, or flying saucers as they were called back then, the main person that was in Majestic 12 that was tied to the government was the very first Secretary of Defense. Well, let's just take a look at a video and then we'll take it from there, shall we?
Saw that all they needed was a little gravity. James Forrestal was openly critical of government corruption and lack of transparency. A man with a conscience isn't suited for a seat at the most secret table in the world. For MJ-12, Forrestal was a problem. Saw that all they needed was a little gravity. James Vincent Forrestal didn't come from old money or privilege. He clawed his way up from newspaper reporter to Wall Street millionaire. By age 40, he was president of the powerhouse investment firm Dillon Read & Company. When World War II broke out, he walked away from finance to serve his country. Roosevelt made him Undersecretary of the Navy, then Secretary of the Navy, and finally First Secretary of Defense. Forrestal oversaw the transition from wartime America into the Cold War superpower.
Now, Forrestal, like you just saw, was a very decorated man built from the ground up. And one thing you're going to learn in this video was he was a man of the people. He didn't believe in secrets. And even after becoming the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal often butted heads with then President Truman about things that needed to be public and things that needed to stay top secret. So it wasn't a new thing that he butted heads with his bosses.
His rags to riches story was the American dream, but he was the nightmare for the Washington establishment. He was independent, wealthy, and wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. Forrestal couldn't be controlled. That made him dangerous. By March 1949, the pressure campaign worked. Forrestal was forced to resign as Secretary of Defense. 11 weeks later, he was dead. At 1:50 a.m. on May 22, 1949, a nurse heard a crash outside. Forrestal's body was found on a third-floor ledge, 13 stories below his window. The belt of his bathrobe was tied around his neck. The hospital declared it a suicide within hours. No autopsy, no investigation. The coroner rubber-stamped the report without inspecting the body. Forrestal's brother Henry called it murder. Navy officials ordered personnel to stay silent. They even classified the number of windows in his room as top secret. Forrestal's diaries were seized immediately. Thousands of pages of meetings, conversations, personal reflections. When they were finally released 2 years later, entire sections were missing. His family believed the censored passages contained secrets that powerful people wanted buried. Instead, Forrestal was buried.
So, James Forrestal, which they don't really talk a lot about in that video, was allegedly the very first person to oversee Majestic 12, or the group of 12 guys that would be the key holders of all this flying saucer UFO information, and to relegate where it went, how it got used, and where to keep it secret. But as you heard there, he was not one. He was all about the public knowing information. And quickly, according to the story, he grew tiresome to the rest of the members of Majestic 12. So when he stepped down as Secretary of Defense, he went into the hospital for exhaustion, or depression and exhaustion. And that is where he mysteriously, allegedly jumped out the window to his death. So all these disappearances and deaths aren't a new thing. It has been centered around ufology, like I said, since the very beginning. So at least to us, at least to me, I should say, it almost sounds like it's not. Most people think this world is money is the root of all evil and the center of power, but it's almost like information is more so powerful than money is. Maybe they go hand in hand, because, I don't really have either. So what does it matter to me? I'm just some guy sitting here behind the microphone talking about it. But information is power. And I think that if you want to call that a conspiracy, I wouldn't argue or debate you on that one, because we do have top secret for a reason. And I get some things that need to be top secret. But is information that valuable to take people, make them disappear? unalive them? Is it that vital to have the upper hand on information against your adversaries and your enemies that you're willing to kill or make people disappear for it? Must be some damn important information. But what do I know? I don't have the verifiable, the empirical proof behind it. I debated on whether to add this final one to this entire episode or not, because it doesn't really fit in with the 12 missing scientists and military members that is kind of central to this story. But people are starting to put it together as including him into this as well. So we'll just take it from there.
And away we go. So it's another day and another UFO researcher who unalives himself. And this one might be the biggest one yet. Now, this is David Wilcock. He is a major figure in the UFO research space, and they said that he unalives himself shortly after the police arrived at his home, which
that whole unaliving part is true. He's not necessarily a UFO researcher. He is somebody that has made a name for himself within the conspiracy theory field, which he has talked about certain things pertaining to UFOs and UAPs and military cover-ups and all of that. But as far as a researcher of just UFOs and UAPs, no, he was more in conspiracy, and he became most famous for appearing on the old History Channel show Ancient Aliens. But he's not a UFO researcher. He is definitely a conspiracy theory researcher.
which is very odd, only because of one, he goes on a podcast a couple days ago speaking about all the missing and or dead scientists, and two, he goes to say that he loves life and every day is a gift.
Every day that I have on Earth is a gift and a blessing, and I'm very grateful for that. People are disappearing. Scientists are going missing.
I mean, it's a little odd to me, a person with psychiatric background who helped with mental health and also worked for a suicide hotline would do this to himself. Now,
he's leaving a whole lot out about David Wilcock that we'll get to here in just a little bit, but just keep in mind what he just said.
if that's not weird to you, then maybe this is, because he wrote a book with Winfrey, who is his co-author, who is also dead. Wait, hold on. So you mean to tell me just 6 days before Winfrey dies and then David dies, and they wrote a book about interdimensional communication, and this disclosure that they're talking about is interdimensional beings? Interesting. But it gets even weirder. You guys, just 3 days before David dies, this happens. An aerospace defense engineer and military veteran dies in a plane crash with his family. This was James Moffat, a decorated pilot, aerospace engineer, and get this, former NASA-linked researcher who went down in a plane crash with his wife and his 2 sons. And mind you, one of the sons that was in the plane with him was an up-and-coming researcher himself, so if they had vital information, they just decided to just take out the entire bloodline. Now you can add this to the long list of missing or deceased of researchers and scientists like Nuno Loureiro. You have General McCaslin, Monica Reza, Carl Grillmeyer, and Amy Eskridge, who has a very, very interesting situation. Now she was based in Huntsville, Alabama, which is known as Rocket City, and she was an anti-gravity researcher. But in 2022, she was found, you guessed it, unalive with a gunshot wound to the head. But here's the thing. She said herself, oh, by the way, if you see any report that I unalived myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I overdosed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I unalived anyone else, I most definitely did not. So you mean to tell me that these people said they won't unalive themselves and they actually unalive themselves? Could they be controlled? Well, there is a voice-to-skull technology and electronic harassment mechanism. What? I mean, why does the U.S. Army own a patent where they can take microwave pulses and beam frequencies and audio into your head?
They own a lot of patents for things that were never put into use. A lot of, shall we say, out there ideas. So he's trying to attach things that are unverifiable to a lot of these deaths and missing folks. He's putting conspiracy into it, which I know is what we're talking about, but he's trying to connect the dots, so to speak, with unverifiable information.
Just saying. Now, the microwave auditory effect, or the Frey effect, was actually developed by neuroscientist Alan Frey, which consists of the human perception of sounds induced by pulse or modulated radio frequencies, but that's just a coincidence, right? Right? And it's kind of weird that Amy actually had these text messages leaked out saying that she's getting hit repeatedly by military-grade sci-fi weapons, aka direct energy weapons, so there's that. And if all that wasn't weird enough for you guys, David actually died at the age of 53 on April 20th, which is exactly 53 days from this movie's release called Disclosure Day, which is about UFO disclosure. Got it. You guys, I'm doing a bigger breakdown on all this. It's a lot more to unpack, so make sure you guys go to my YouTube, The Maverick Approach, and let me know what you guys think down below.
If you're so interested, go check out his page. It's out there. Now, we've talked about all the other disappearances and unalivings. So let's center on David Wilcox because he left out a ton. And just because he was somebody that volunteered for suicide prevention hotline and whatnot, what he's not telling you, and what David Wilcox family will tell you, is he has suffered from mental illness his entire life, struggling with depression and all sorts of issues, and has been suicidal in his past. So any of this mysterious deaths that came to him, unfortunately, isn't anything new. But I realize saying that in that content creator's video kind of ruins his whole conspiracy thing around it. But David Wilcox struggled with mental illness his entire life. Now, I am going to put out there right now that I vehemently disagreed, and I've talked about a lot of David Wilcox stuff before on this podcast over the past 10 years. I absolutely disagreed or didn't believe 99.9% of the stuff that he said. Do I feel bad for him and his family that he apparently killed himself, committed suicide? Yes, I do. Because mental illness is a terrible thing to have to live with, not only for the person, but for the family as well. So that's why I kind of struggled about including his story in this episode. But since it's really blowing up now with him unfortunately passing away, and everyone is including him, I figured I would do it. But do I think it has anything nefarious around it? No, because he has been doing this for years. And if they wanted to silence him, they certainly wouldn't have waited 20 years to do it. Once he made a name for himself, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I think if they were going to do anything, they would have done it then and not waited for 20 years. Well, let's be honest, his name has he's had his 15 minutes of fame. We'll put it that way. He was still making appearances in videos and podcasts and whatnot, but he wasn't the big name anymore. So I think he was well on his way to not being relevant for people to want to shut up anymore. So, is it sad that he passed away? Yes, it is. But do I think it has any connection to all these other mysterious disappearances and unalivings? No, I don't. But what is going on with all this? Is there a conspiracy? It certainly looks like it, but do I know for a fact? No, but it is very curious that all of these people working in the same general field are mysteriously coming up missing or passing away. But hey, maybe you have some information. Maybe you disagree with me. If you do, let me know in the comments. And as always, don't forget to click like and subscribe so you're notified each and every time there's a new episode. And I am going to follow this up at a later date, talking about the whole inside part of the disinformation, because that goes down a whole nother rabbit hole. But as usual, I don't have a closer for this, so I'm simply going to close.